look like Spinelli. We're committed at this point, so. I haven't showered, so you know that means it's the return of the hat. The return of the hat. Should I change? We're just gonna go with it. Hi guys. Thanks for coming by. If you are new here, hi, hello, welcome. I am Sherrilyn and I'm so glad you found me. If you're not new here and you are a Wine Wednesday regular, welcome back. Thank you so much for coming to hang out with me. Hey, if you like wine and you're into true crime and love the vibe of just hanging out amongst your friends, please join us every Wednesday. Hit that subscribe button so you can come and hang out with us. And you don't need to like wine. You can drink anything you want. Maybe you're a sparkling water person. I love a good buble here and there. The sky's the limit here. We just like to hang out with you. It was actually a true crime family member who suggested this case today, so thank you to Mika Lee. I can't believe I had never heard of this guy. This is literally what your nightmares are made of. Before we get into it though, Sherrilyn from the past is going to tell you a little bit about our sponsor today. A huge thank you to our sponsor today, Skillshare. I am so excited to talk about this one with you guys. If you're like me and can take all the possible courses on something that interests you so that you can turn or like feel like you're a master in it, this is for you. First off, if you've never heard about Skillshare before, it's an online learning community and they've got thousands of courses that you can take in pretty much any genre that interests you and any skill level you're at, whether you're a noob, like the cool kids used to say, but I don't think they do anymore, or you fancy yourself a pro, and anywhere in between, you will be able to find something to sharpen those skills. One thing I really love is that there's a variety of lessons, so they can really fit like anybody's schedule. Even me, who is juggling 3 children, one of them who is a newborn, my husband, my family life. Right now I'm planning a big murder mystery party for my birthday. I'm learning a new language. I research cases every week. I film and I edit, and I still have the time to do this just because I love it. A huge bonus for me is that I can use the app on my phone and take these lessons like anywhere I'm going. So if I have a few minutes to spare here and there, I've got it right on my phone. I can pick up the lesson right where I left off and just continue until I'm done the course. Also a bonus, there's no ads. So if you are like me and you see a squirrel and you're distracted, this is perfect. So you can just like stay concentrated and not be distracted by an ad that keeps popping up. I started with iPhone photography, how to take pro photos on your iPhone from Dale McManus. It was only a 56-minute course, and by the end of it, I was so excited to try to test out my skills. And I'm so impressed with how they turned out that now I'm gonna share them with you. See what I did? Skillshare. But seriously, you guys, look how stinking cute these pictures are of Ori. I took all of these on my iPhone. I'm not gonna lie, I am so dang impressed with myself. This was just a 56-minute course that I took in a day. I took 20 minutes here and there and I was done. If you like the feeling of almost being in like a class setting and having an instructor, they also provide like live workshops, which is really cool because you can kind of feel like you've got a sense of community. If you guys want to check it out, Skillshare is offering my first 1,000 true crime family members a chance to try Skillshare for free for 1 month. Start the car. That link is in the description for you guys to snatch up that bad boy before it's gone. Get those creative juices flowing, my loves, and let me know what you guys end up taking. Thank you again, Skillshare. All right, let's get into it. Grab your drinks, grab your snacks. Today I'm drinking agua because if you follow me on Instagram, you know I was in some high stake poker games this weekend. There was a lot of beverages being indulged. So we're just gonna be kind to the liver this week. All right, today we are talking about Robert Hansen. You guys, this guy, this is one of those cases where you just like, you definitely forget that this is real life because you're like, stop. First of all, the amount of chances this guy should have just been held behind bars for the rest of his life and they were just dropped opportunities. And then second, just the terror and the way that he would capture his victims. He was a hunter, so he would take them out to the woods in a plane where no one could hear them and they were isolated. That's what we're working with today. We are getting ahead of ourselves though, so let's start from the beginning. Robert was born on May 15th, 1939 to his parents Edna and Christian. Christian was an immigrant from Denmark who was explained as like very brash, ran a really tight ship. He was not warm and fuzzy. Edna was said to be the calm of the house. She was who the children could go to if they just needed that like maternal love. In 1942, the family moved to Richmond for a short amount of time, and then they settled down and like kind of like planted their roots in an area called Pocahontas. We have a Pocahontas in Alberta. The small was very town. The town was very small. Only about 2,000 people lived there. The Hansen family settled in quite comfortably though, and they opened up their own bakery. I guess this was a huge success in the town. It was like one of those places that the residents liked to go and, have their little coffee and their pastry in the morning and just like sit down and hang out and chit chat. Robert started helping out with it at a very young age. I think that's quite common with family businesses, but for him, there was a lot of pressure on him. He had a lot of responsibilities. He would wake up at like 2 a.m. to go to the bakery and help his dad prepare, which I think for a bakery is very normal to go and get like all of like the baking done. But as the success of the bakery grew, his responsibilities became more and more. There was heavier pressure put on him. And after he would wake up at 2 a.m, prepare everything, he'd have to go straight to school, spend like an 8-hour day at school, and then go back home. His father also treated him almost like a business owner. He was expected to know how to do things, how to run a business at this young age. And if he messed anything up, he was punished for it. He was made to feel like this small, just like a complete moron for not knowing how to run a business in elementary school. So it's not surprising that his grades were not good. They were slipping even further and further as the business did better and better. By the time he got to school, he was just completely exhausted that oftentimes he would just fall asleep at his desk. It seemed like as the pressure was mounting on him, he started to develop a stutter, like I usually have often on this channel. Point made right there. For me, I think it's like my brain is working faster than my mouth can articulate. Apparently, his dad also had a stutter, which is interesting because his dad was very insecure about being an immigrant and having this stutter and already having a little bit of a language barrier. So you'd think if you were going through that and those insecurities, you'd be a little bit more sensitive to your child who's also suffering. But it's he kind of held it against him and maybe projected some of his insecurities on Robert. On top of his stutter, he also had severe acne. It actually left him with really deep scars for the rest of his life. And it made him the target of bullying. The main bullies he said he encountered in school were usually the girls, which was tough because, when you're becoming a teenager and you're interested in girls and you want to talk to them, he had absolutely no confidence. But I'll give it to the guy. He did try to talk, so he'd end up going up, trying to have a conversation, getting so flustered before it even began that he would just trip over his words, and then in the middle of trying to form something, he'd just run away. He's like, this is not working and I'm done. He also never really had the chance to develop a really tight friendship with a best friend. There was never even that one person that he could click with because the hours that were required from him to work at the family business were so intense that he didn't have an opportunity to go and form a friendship. Something I did find a little bit different about Robert when I was reading this as opposed to more common serial killers was that oftentimes they are just naturally introverted and don't want to form connections, whereas he really wanted to. He wanted to make friends. He tried by joining the football team, but wasn't overly athletic. So he stuck to things like choir and track. But even there, he just found himself on the sidelines. No one really wanted to be his friend. Since he wanted to get out and do things, though, he just started finding activities that he could do solo, but still allowed him to be outside, probably wanting to just get out of his house or at the bakery. And he took up things like fishing and hunting and archery, and I guess he was really good at it. He graduated from school in May 1957, and in an attempt to, I'm assuming, get some freedom, get out of the house, get out of the bakery, he joined the Army Reserve. This was the very first time he was ever away from home, but it didn't last very long. For him, it didn't turn out to be all he expected, mainly because he went from being under somebody's thumb at home to going and being under somebody else's control in the army. He moves back to Pocahontas. He doesn't go back home though. He gets his own apartment, but he does go back working for the bakery for a couple years. And then after that, he gets a job as a drill instructor, and he's teaching young kids kind of I guess a cadet style, teaching them about physical workouts that police would do, how the police use their weapons, what kind of weapons they use. Around this time, he also gets his first girlfriend. She's a woman named Phoebe. I think every single Friends fan in the world just automatically goes to Phoebe. I do anyways. Phoebe's explained as also being a little bit socially awkward, not popular. She came from a very religious family, and that's actually how her and Robert met, because their families were friends at church. Everything in his life around this time seemed to be going better. He was also making connections with friends. They were younger than him though. I think he felt like being the older guy hanging out with like these younger kids that were like still in high school or just graduating, made him feel like the popular kid that he wanted to be. Soon this turned into almost like a revenge though. He found himself almost getting stuck being able to move past feeling so inferior in high school and being bullied that he wanted to, switch to seeking revenge. He started by blowing things up and setting fires. The first thing he blew up was a tractor that he recruited his new teenage friends to come and blow up with him. From there, he escalated to targets. The trailer was just a random, okay, let's just go blow this up. And then after that, there was purpose. He really had it out for high school. So the next thing he set his eyes on were the school buses that the children would take to get to the high school. It's not funny, but it's just I don't know how he came up with the school buses. But they were parked in this barn, so he set the barn on fire and hoped that it would wipe out the entire fleet. But get this, so you know how a lot of criminals will go back to the scene of the crime, often even when the police are there or there's a bunch of witnesses and they'll act like they're a witness. Yeah, he did that by acting as a helpful member of the community because he was a volunteer firefighter. So he lights this fire, goes home, puts on his gear, comes back, and then attempts to start putting out the fire that he just started. He would have got away with it too if it wasn't for those meddling kids that he hung out with. Kinda. I guess what happened was some of these teens were at a party one night and they were talking about it, and a couple of them had helped Robert set this fire, so they were, bragging. And an old classmate of Robert's was also at this party. I just kind of realized, why are there more people hanging out at these little teen parties? And then it brings you to when, I don't know if anybody else can relate to this, but when I was in high school and you had those creepy 20-year-old guys that were hanging out at your parties and you thought they were cool, you were cool for hanging out with older people, and now you're older and you're just no, you were a creep. Well, that was a little triggering. So this former classmate of Robert's overhears this and he goes to the police. The police end up questioning this accomplice that he had and they confessed. Robert is arrested and his mother posts his $25,000 bail until he awaits his trial. While he's waiting for trial to start, he marries Phoebe, and for somebody who was seen as an outcast and wasn't popular in school, he really did have a lot of the community support behind him. I'm sure a lot of it had to do with the fact that his family had built such a strong business within the community that nobody could believe that little timid stuttering Robert could do something like this. A lot of people actually thought he was framed, and then it wasn't until he pleaded guilty to avoid a trial that they were oh, okay, well, I guess he did do it. He's sentenced to 3 years in jail, and this kind of has a ripple effect of negativity go on, not only just for him, but even for his family. Phoebe divorces him, and his parents end up being an embarrassment in the community, and their bakery really suffers, and they had to shut it down. While he's in jail, he sees a psychiatrist, and it's here that he tells them that he has this uncontrollable need to seek revenge on the high school that he was at. So he tried to justify setting these buses on fire for what he went through in school. But then he does say that kind of urge to seek revenge was changing from, items or objects like buses to people. He wanted to start targeting specific people who bullied him, primarily women, and do things like blow their cars up or set their houses on fire. The psychiatrist's well, that's not good. This is not what we do, Robert. And when he applies for parole, he's denied. So then he's well, I'm going to fake it till I make it. He becomes this poster child for prison inmates. He took courses, he got jobs, he wanted to work with a speech therapist. On the outside, it appeared like he was taking all of the necessary steps to be a successful, functioning member of society. And in May 1936, not 36, 63, it worked out and he was released back to go and live with his parents. His parents wanted to see the good in him, so they thought the best way to do that, since they had already lost their family business, was to move away and just have a fresh start. They moved to Leech Lake and they buy the Stony Point Resort, which is located in Minnesota. Again, he started working for his family, but this time there was more freedom for him. He wasn't just like stuck and stifled next to his dad in this little bakery. This was a resort, it was outside, so he had much more freedom. While working there, he met a lady that his parents had hired as a housekeeper. Her name was Darla. She sounded a lot like Phoebes, also very socially awkward. Grew up in actually the same town that Robert did and also went to the same church, but they never ran into each other until they both had moved. They think it's fate and meant to be, so it didn't take long for them to get married, and then after that they moved around place to place within Minnesota for a while. He's doing okay for a bit in terms of, suppressing his need to be like reckless, but then he starts getting restless again and he goes to stealing. For a while he thought of himself as quite a successful thief. He'd steal things like bikes and sporting equipments and electronics. It only takes a matter of time though until it catches up with him and he's caught. His wife was still very naive to who he was though, so she reached out to her pastor and she asked him to vouch for Robert and explain that he was a great guy, just got married, family man. This was a moment of weakness, and by doing that, the charges were dropped. Not too long after this, his wife graduates as a teacher and they decide to move to Alaska in 1967. Probably for the best for Robert because he was still stealing and he would continually get caught, but he was able to talk his way out of it each time. So I think he probably felt like, all right, I can only run this for so long. We got to get out of here. They choose an area called Anchorage to settle down in, and Robert got a job as a baker and Darla as a teacher. This area in particular was ideal for Robert. Being somebody who liked to be outside a lot, this was like a hunting paradise. He even got out there and joined an archery club, which he actually had a record in for how accurate his bow hunting was. Hunting also introduced him to his best friend at this time, and this was a man named John. It sounds like he's starting to live more of that, normal life, getting out, making friends. His wife's a teacher. In 1971, they add children to their family. Their first baby was a little girl named Christy. On the outside, it seemed, like this ideal family life, but after he had a child, instead of it changing him for the positive, it actually took him back in like a dark direction. He started to pull away from his wife and his little girl, spending a lot more time away from home, poured himself further into hunting, and on November 15th, 1971, he started hunting humans. Robert's out driving one day and he notices this really pretty woman who pulls up beside him at a red light, and she just politely, looks over, gives a little smile, and then drives away. Note to self, do not smile at people at traffic lights. Add that to the ever-growing list of tips to survive that I've learned from true crime. The girl at the light's name was Susie Heppard, and she's an 18-year-old receptionist at a real estate firm. It was actually on her way home from work that she sees Robert at the lights. After that brief smile, she just drives on to home, walks in the door, she's like ready to just chill for the night, take off the old bra, have a hot shower, just veg out. She's about to get in the shower and she hears a knock at her door. She goes to the door, opens it up, and sits there for a minute to process, and she's like, what the shit? Is this the guy from the light? Why are you here? And Robert's just standing there. He's not saying anything. And then he says, I think I'm trying to find another unit. She says she's not sure who he's looking for, so he asks if he can come in and borrow her phone book. She reluctantly agrees, and she says he's just aimlessly flipping through it, like not even like looking, like just like, and creepily like staring and smiling at her. He says he couldn't find the name, and then is like, so do you want to go on a date? While I'm here. Susie politely just says she can't, and she lies and says she has a fiance. To her relief, he just accepts and he leaves. A few days pass, and she's kind of just gotten over the event, going on with her life, and one morning she's out grabbing coffee for her and her roommate. She comes back to the apartment, and as she's parking her car, she thought she saw somebody run in front of it. Didn't think too much of it. She gets out of her car, looks up, and somebody jumps in front of her, and they've got a gun pointed at her head, and it's Robert. He tells her to be quiet or he's gonna shoot her. And Susie's like, I don't give an F, bro. Starts screaming loud enough that her roommate does hear her. She looks out the window, sees what's going on. She immediately calls the police. And I mean, I don't know if these guys must have been really close, because it sounds like as he's dragging her to his car, you could already start to hear the sirens going off in the distance. So it was enough to scare him that he just left Susie and his car and booked it out of there. When the police arrive, she gives a description of Robert, and it only took a few hours for them to find him just like aimlessly walking around. They bring him back to the apartment, and Susie identifies him as her attacker, and also the guy who stalked her and showed up at her apartment like a week prior. He's arrested, and after just embarrassing himself for hours trying to deny it, the cops are like, bro, like, you left your car and your gun. So he was charged. But something about this guy just kept allowing him to slip through the cracks, and his lawyer was able to get him $2,000 bail by just saying like, oh, you know what, he's a family guy. Huge mistake. So he's out on bail, and within weeks he starts to target another woman. And now in his mind, he's already better prepared to not get caught. It was December 19th, and he sets his eyes on a woman named Barbara Fields. Barbara's driving home before sunrise, and it's December in Alaska, and it's hella cold. Her window kept fogging up, so she decides like the safest and best thing to do is just pull over into this little coffee shop that she saw, let her car run and de-thaw basically, and have a coffee. She pulls into the parking stall, and a Pontiac pulls in beside her, and it's Robert. She doesn't pay much attention. She notices it, but then just starts walking to the door. And before she can get to the door, Robert runs ahead of her, and not to be, chivalrous and just open it for her, but to pull a gun on her and tell her to follow him to his car or he was going to shoot her. So she did. They drive away, and he's just got like one hand on the steering wheel. The other has the gun just like pointed at her head, telling her to calm down. They drive about 80 miles out of Anchorage, and they stop 2 times. One time is an attempt for Robert to assault her, but Barbara's able to talk him out of it, and then the next time she's able to convince him to stop to buy her some smokes. They drive to a motel called Sunrise Inn, and he's got her hands tied with shoelaces, so he drapes this jacket over her, and he's like, do not bring any attention to yourself. They check in, and at this motel he assaults Barbara. He falls asleep for a little while, and she thinks she's kind of got an opportunity to try to get herself loose out of these shoelaces, restraints, but it was way too tight, and she just sat there until he woke up. When he wakes up, they get back in the car, and he says he wants to take her to a place called Kenai Peninsula, and he tells her that he's already taken some women there, and he wants to show her something. The tough thing about this case is that Robert claimed to not remember a lot of his victims, so there had been women who were missing and never found. Based on some of these accounts that Robert was able to remember, or by people who survived, it's believed that prior to Barbara, there were several other women who were brought to this location and never made it out. Based on her story, we can try to get an idea of what they went through. When they get to this Kenai Peninsula specifically, though, they weren't able to get through this trail because the weather was too bad. So he brings her to a different area that's like isolated, and it's like near a cliff instead. He gets out of the car, grabs his gun, goes over to Barbara's side, opens her door, and he tells her to run. For a second, she's like, yeah, done, see ya. But quickly she's like, no, this is a trap. She felt like he wanted to hunt her. There was something like he wanted her to leave and run, and he would hunt her down, and if she died there, she knew she was never going to be found. So instead, she just collapses on the ground, and she starts crying at his feet, and she's begging him to let her stay. She's scared. She doesn't want to be left there, and she says she doesn't want him to leave her, and that like in the time that they've spent together, she realizes he's a nice guy, and she doesn't want him to leave her. He's just a little bit overwhelmed. He like starts stuttering a bunch, and he's like, well, I can't take you back because you're going to call the police. She tells him no. She says that she hates the police. They're the last people she'd ever go to. She doesn't trust them. Meanwhile, her father is actually on the force. She tells him that for good measure, she'll allow him to go through her purse, take down her address on her ID card, and she also has an address book in there with all of her family members' names, numbers, addresses, and he can take those too, and then he would know where to find her and her family if she went to the police and he wanted to seek revenge. He takes down everybody's address, and miraculously he drives her back to Anchorage and drops her back off at the cafe that he had kidnapped her from. She calls her family to pick her up, and she briefly gives like this vague account of what happened. She didn't go into a lot of detail, and she's begging them, not to say anything because she truly does feel like he's gonna come back and kill her. She's traumatized by what just happened. And then 3 days after Christmas, she's sitting at home and she's reading the paper. She comes across a story about a girl named Celia Van Zanten. The article basically says that she had gone to the store to just quickly pick up a few items and she never returned. Her parents said initially they weren't too alarmed because she had also committed to doing a babysitting job later on in the day. So they just assumed that maybe she ran a couple other errands and then was just going to go to this babysitting job from there. But then they noticed the next morning that her room had not been slept in and realized she'd never come back. Before getting too alarmed, they called the family that she was supposed to babysit to just see if maybe she spent the night there. And they said to them, no, we actually canceled the job. She didn't come here at all yesterday. They file a missing person report with the police, and 2 days later, their biggest nightmare becomes a reality when two brothers who were out fishing at a campground think they see a mannequin. Everybody, it is never a mannequin. As they get closer, they realize that when they see that it's an unclothed woman and it's Celia. During the investigation, they're able to see that she had died due to severe weather conditions. It was very cold, but it appeared that she had actually left the location that somebody possibly left her at, and she had walked up this slope that was 20 miles long before just succumbing to the elements. Based on the condition of her body though, which had surface knife wounds on it, and the fact that she was unclothed, they realized there was definitely some foul play involved here at some point. On top of that, an autopsy was also able to prove that she was sexually assaulted. The police brought in several men that they thought could have been involved. Even the man that she was actually supposed to babysit for, they thought maybe he lied and said that he canceled the job, but really he had done something with her. They even looked at a past fiance of hers and even her brother at one point, but all leads turned up to going nowhere. Then the day Barbara saw the story in the news, a call comes through to the detective who's on Celia's case, and he says that he might have some information that could possibly lead to a suspect. The problem is though that he said this girl doesn't want to be identified and doesn't even want to formally give a statement. She wants to just give a statement to this detective who's calling the other one because she's worried that since her profession, which is a private dancer, she's just going to be dismissed and judged. The detective's like, yeah, that's not going to work for us. We're going to need more than that. And the officer on the other end is like, I trust her. It's my daughter. It turns out the detective on the other line was Barbara's dad. He said Barbara and their family just wanted her statement and situation out of the public. They said they loved her no matter what she did, and they were just hopeful that this brush with death was going to be enough to bring her back home and open to working a safer job. The detective was quite sympathetic and understood okay, I can see where she's coming from. I assure you I'm going to handle the situation with respect and listen to everything that you have to say without any blinders on. So Barbara agrees to talk to him. She tells them the entire story, and they can see just based on her face how riddled with guilt she is, that she never said something sooner and really took on responsibility that because of her fears, she kept a monster on the street to take another young woman's life. They follow up with her story and they go to the motel that she said she was taken to, and the clerk was like, yeah, I remember seeing her, pulls up the info of the room that she stayed in and who checked them in, and Robert provided his own information. The guy is ballsy. They arrest him and he's just cool as a cucumber, denies her story. They go through his wallet though, and they see this piece of paper with her address, her family member's address, and they're what is this about? And he's like, I don't know. I have no idea how that got in there. But this guy's a slimy, crafty little worm because he knows that they can't keep evidence unless they're going to arrest him, which at this moment they just didn't have enough for. So while they're scrambling to get this search warrant of his items in order, he tells this young rookie who's like keeping an eye on this wallet and trying to process it, like, hey, like, no, you need to give that back to me. I need something in there. Robert takes out this piece of paper that has everybody's address. He crumples it up and he like shoves it in his pocket. And the officer's like, what you got there? And he's like, I need this information if you're going to end up booking me. So the officer takes the paper, but he only just writes down what's on it. So the actual evidence is useless because this is the detective's own paper with his own writing on it. And Robert keeps the evidence and he throws it away. This was basically like the only tangible proof to confirm Barbara's account of events. Even with the hotel clerk's testimony to say that he saw them together, there's no proof that he knew what was going on behind closed doors of the motel. So this like just was what they needed to just like really hammer it in that she was telling the truth. He's still taken into custody though, and he has like a preliminary trial on January the 7th, and his lawyer's there and he is the scuzziest piece of crap. When it's time to question Barbara, he rips into her about her line of work. Even goes as far as to say like, oh, well, what kind of clothes were you wearing that day that might attract this type of attention? Trying to justify her assault based on her clothes because, you know, like, oh, you're dressing like you're asking for it. First, you. Second, that shit needs to stop. Like, we still hear this. Don't ever let anybody make you feel like you deserve anything that happens to you based on your clothing, your profession, whether you've had something to drink, your lifestyle, any addiction issues. Like, there's never a time where it's justified. And if I ever saw this lawyer in person, I would have zero reservations about telling him to his face what a piece of absolute garbage he is. Sorry. For me personally, it gets me so worked up because my family has worked with hundreds of women who have gone through hell and back in their lives. Many of them women who struggle with addiction, many of them who are in the sex industry. And the fact that so often these women are treated like second-class citizens and anything that they say is just like devalued and they're made to feel like they deserve horrible things that happen to them, it's just infuriating. This monster lawyer even takes it to extremes by trying to tell her to be like as descriptive as possible, like just traumatizing and humiliating her on the stand. It's just absolutely sickening, and he wanted to break her. She tried to hold her head high, but sadly this lawyer painted this awful picture of her, and he brought in character witnesses that vouched for Robert, showed him in a much more positive light than he should have been. He had a pastor come. He had a friend of his who was a very respected member of the community come, all of which basically said that they didn't believe that their friend would ever get caught up in something like this and that they didn't think that he would ever associate with the likes of Barbara. So basically anything she said couldn't be trusted. When it was his chance to enter a plea, he pleaded not guilty, but he was sent to jail until trial was supposed to start because bail was posted at $50,000 and he just didn't have it. Poor you. He started seeing a psychiatrist in there though, and he diagnosed him with schizophrenia and labeled Robert as vulnerable to dissociative episodes, meaning that if he was responsible for anything that somebody said he did, he was not aware of it, so really he wasn't responsible. Meanwhile, Barbara is just falling apart at coming to terms with the fact that he was painted as this victim and she was the target of every attempt that defense could throw at her to just make her look like a deplorable human being. And the poor thing, she just couldn't take it anymore. She just got so checked out of everything that most of the charges ended up getting dropped. At the end of the day, he was only sentenced to 5 years and he actually only served 3 months of it before he was allowed to be released on a work program at a halfway house. And sadly, there was just absolutely no evidence for them to even charge him with the death of Celia, which was the whole reason why Barbara wanted to come forward in the first place. In Robert's eyes, this is like another opportunity where, ooh, got away from that, and now I've learned my lesson even further, so I'm going to be even craftier. He decides, after seeing the way that Barbara was just ripped apart and discredited, he was only going to focus on people who were addicts or in the sex industry because his word held more weight against theirs. So almost every day when he left his halfway house to go to work, he'd leave a few minutes early and he would drive through the area where the women were on the streets working, and he would just stalk them. Then in September 1974, he's ready to make his first move since being released. He sees a young girl walking at night and he pulls over and he asks if she needs a ride. This girl felt like he looked very dorky, very innocent, and like he couldn't be a threat, so she agrees to get in the car and have him drive her to her house. Robert does drive her to her house, but before she gets out of the car, he pulls out a gun and tells her to stay in the vehicle and then just speeds off. So now he knows where she lives. They're driving for a bit and he's grilling her on very disgusting personal questions. He then assaults her and then he hands her his gun and he says, "Tell me where you want me to take you, whether that's at the police station or back at your house." And she's also feeling like, okay, well, this is a freaking trap. So she doesn't try to pull the trigger or anything. She just says she'd like to go back home, and she promises him that she won't say anything. Although he had already been through this with Barbara, something in him just agreed, and he did take her back, saying, as long as you don't say anything, I'll do what you want me to do. I guess her house was a foster home. She was living with foster parents, and she did tell them what happened. But like Barbara, she also had this fear of Robert that, he knows where we live. I don't want to say anything. And I just felt so awful for her because the family, agreed to respect her wishes and not say anything. But then the very next day, they asked for her to be rehomed and removed from the house. Nothing happens with Robert. She never goes and reports anything. And the next year, a dancer at a club was forced into his car like his other victims, and the same routines were repeated. With this dancer, he's just so sure of himself and just so confident and arrogant that no one's going to believe anything she says because of her profession. That he just lets her go without saying don't tell anybody. He's just see you later. No one's going to believe you. With this girl though, she remembers his license plate. So she goes straight to the police and they track it back to Robert. Unfortunately though, in this case, the woman only wanted to speak to a victims of assault counselor and she wouldn't provide her legal name. So when they questioned Robert, he just denies everything. He said that he did meet with her, they did, exchange services, and that an argument happened because she was greedy and she was trying to steal money from him. And because this woman wasn't willing to testify, wasn't willing to provide her legal name, the case went nowhere. In her situation, she said that she was a teacher by day and a dancer by night, so she was fearful that if this had made it to the news and her name was in the papers, she would lose her job as a teacher, which she just couldn't afford to do. So because of that, this effer walks again. Through this, his wife sticks by him. In fact, they have another baby, which is a little boy that they named Johnny. And there's something again about him having these children where he just gets even more anxious and really has to release even more. So he goes back to wanting to steal things again. And in 1976, he's feeling, very untouchable. He's learned a lot throughout these years. So he walks into this sporting goods store and just steals a chainsaw and tries to walk out with it. The security guard has his eye already on him. He's feeling like he looks a little bit dodgy, so he stops him. He's like, what are you doing? The police arrest him, and then given his past convictions, he's charged with larceny. He tells the court that he just wanted to provide the chainsaw as a gift to his father to thank him for, all of the things he's done for him in his life, and he couldn't afford it, but he knew his dad needed hated this, and he's got this big whole like sob story. This time he's assessed by another doctor, and this doctor says that he believes he's got manic depression and bipolar disorder, and he believes that Robert's a good guy. He just needs like some mood stabilizers, so he prescribes him some. This time he's sentenced to 5 years, but in 1978, after he'd only served 2, he was let out again. He just picks up right where he left off. Like, no moment where he's like, I don't think I'm good at this. I should probably stop. This time, though, he's moonlighting more, I guess, as like a family guy, spending a little bit more time at home. And then he is going also on more hunting trips with his best friend, John. And their favorite spot to go is this area called Nix River. I guess it's just north of where they lived in Anchorage. And it's said to be absolutely beautiful. You've got like beautiful mountain views while you're like fishing and hunting. How he was able to get weapons like guns with his record is just beyond me, but he had a lot of like pistols and rifles. And among his gear, he also bought a 2-seater single engine plane. With the plane, he said that he could get deeper into areas that you like couldn't get on foot when you're hunting. And then he also liked to like shoot at animals from up in the air. There's often like such like missed opportunities for like being a productive like member of society instead in these cases. Like if you had like that good of aim, you probably could have been like a sharpshooter on like the squad of like the police force or like in the military or something. Even when we just went over the teacup poisoner case, like he could have been like a brilliant scientist with all of his knowledge of, like chemicals and how to like mix things and do stuff. It's just, come on, let's be productive here, man. When he wasn't hunting, he was frequenting? Why does that sound weird? Frequenting. Hey, Suri. Is frequenting a word?
As an adjective, it means occurring or done many times at short intervals. Do you want to hear the remaining one?
No, I'm good, thank you. It sounds weird. You know that when I say a word and it just doesn't sound right? He's frequenting a topless bar. He actually goes to like quite a few that are in the area. And in October 1979, he goes to one called Embers, and he meets a dancer there named Christy Hayes. She agrees to meet Robert after her shift for a little bit of extra money. When she's done, she goes out to the parking lot, meets Robert, performs her services, and before she leaves, he goes to his signature move and he pulls a gun on her. It sounds like he's driving this like, I don't know, this like trailerish truck or something, where I think it's like the truck and then there's like a partition with like a trailer behind it. And she's kind of in that back area. So he like flips over to go to the front and she starts screaming. He just like pedal to the metal, gets out of there so no one can hear her. She's screaming for her life though. She's pounding on the windows and he's driving. So he's trying to do like anything he can to stop her. So he just like slams on the brakes. So she like flies into this wall. I guess she like gashes her head open, but she's like relentless. She's like, I am not giving up, just losing it. He ends up stopping the trailer to like go to the back to get her. While he's out there, she quickly locks the doors though. But then she realizes the driver's side window is rolled down. So this is like back in the day where you're like rolling and cranking this window up. So before the window's all the way up, he's got his hand in the window, and while he's like pulling it out, the window like shatters and breaks. So now it's like completely open. He's able to unlock the door, jumps in, but she's able to like whip herself over to the passenger side and just books it and runs for her life. She had put up such a fight though that Robert was like, you know what, this isn't even worth my time to chase her. If it ever comes that the police question me, I'm just going to do what I've always done, just like deny. Unfortunately, she never went to the police. She leaves that club though, but she gets a job at a different club in the area. She changed her stage name, changed her look, she got like a new wig, so she looked like a different person kind of. And since Robert did his rounds like at like multiple clubs in the area, he ends up at this club that she's at. But since she's looking different, he has no idea who she is, but she knows who he is. So she launches at him from the stage and just starts like clawing the crap out of him. The cops are called, and when they come, she tells them the story of what had happened prior with Robert. But since there was no evidence and enough time had passed for him to like dispose of anything on his end, he's let go again. which is just devastating because that same night he kills a woman. It's not Christy, and the accounts of what happened here come from Robert, and he says that he doesn't actually even remember her name. With this woman, I guess she jumped into the trailer with him and he promised to take her home. As they get deeper and deeper in the middle of nowhere though, she quickly realizes he's not taking her home. Before she can lose it though, like Christy did, he just knocks her out, so she's just like not even given the chance to scream. When she comes to, she's just pleading for her life. She's not screaming, not putting up a fuss. She just wants to live, and he says he won't kill her, but he does just keep driving her further out, and she has no idea where they're going. At one point even, they actually get stuck in this thick mud, and this poor thing, he uses her to like push and try to like get them out of this situation. She gets them unstuck, gets back in the car, and Robert goes to attack her, but she's got this big knife in her purse. She pulls it out and tries to get at him, but he very easily overpowers her, takes control of the knife, turns it on her. He buried her in a shallow grave out there, and to this day she is still unidentified and only known as Aklunta Annie. I hope I pronounced that right. A few months later, he's walking around this like fishing dock when he runs into this woman that he finds quite attractive. Her name is Joanne, and he strikes up a conversation with her, and he says she's quite receptive to it. You know, normally women shut him down. They found him uncomfortable and awkward, but he's like, oh damn, like she's feeling me. So he invites her to dinner and she agrees. I guess they had a nice dinner and they decided to even like extend it by going on a walk and talking afterwards. He finds out that she's a nursing student back home, and right now she was wanting to save enough money by getting a job on the docks so that she could make her way back home. She was low on funds though, so when Robert invited her to, you know, like keep talking and hanging out, she sees this as like maybe it's a potential, you know, opportunity to make some money to get me home faster. So when they get back to his vehicle, she's like, you know, like if you want to make this an even better time, and you've got some money, we could do that. But as soon as she had like flipped the switch from somebody that he was, you know, like wanting to go on a date with and stuff into somebody who was willing to, you know, perform services for money, he like got enraged. He just wanted her to be this like sweet, innocent nursing student, a good catch, and now he was like pissed that she wasn't what he was like making her up to be in his head. So he starts driving to the middle of nowhere, and she's not catching on. She's just still suggesting, hey, like about that opportunity. And then he just starts like seething. Then it finally hits her like things are not going well. This is not a good situation to be in. She starts yelling at him to take her back. Robert just like doesn't say anything. He stops the truck, and she takes this as an opportunity to run away. And that's exactly what Robert wanted from his victims. He wanted a chase, and so he hunted her, and unfortunately she was no match for his skill and accuracy. In her case, it didn't take long for her body to be found. It was on the 8th of July in 1980. It was actually a bear who found it, and the police were called. They were able to retrieve like what remained, but after that it was like body after body was getting discovered. One of them was a woman named Karen Bonsgarden who had been missing since June 28th. Her friends say the last they had seen her, she was leaving to go on a date with an unidentified man, and she never returned. Then there was a woman named Lisa Futrell who was 41 years old. She was originally from Hawaii, and she had relocated to Alaska. She got a job at a club called the Alaskan Bush Company, and after she had finished her shift as a dancer there, she told her coworkers she was going to meet a man in the parking lot, and she was never seen again. The next year, on February 18th, 1981, 3 women, all from the same club, go missing. Their names were Molly, Michelle, and Maria. Next, in June, a woman named Miley, who was trying to get enough money working as a dancer to bring her family over from Thailand, goes missing. And sadly, it takes a month for her family to even realize that something was going wrong because they had been abroad. The response from most of the detectives in the police department were similar in these missing cases. There was one female detective who suspected that a serial killer was responsible, but the majority of her colleagues felt the same way that the police did in the Willie Pickton case. They felt like there was no proof that these women were even missing because they lived a lifestyle where where they were known to just like get up and leave and go work at another town. So there was no proof, or, you know, like it wasn't even worth looking into when they weren't even sure they were actually missing. By this time, Robert is just a shell of who his wife knew. He's basically just going to work and going to hunt. He doesn't spend any time at home. He wasn't a shit dad in terms of like being abusive or mean. His kids actually loved him quite a bit, but they just didn't see him much. He would actually send them away to Darla's parents' house throughout the summer so that he could just have that time alone, and he would stay behind. And while he had that freedom, this allowed those like dark, you know, impulses to just like always stay on the surface, so he didn't have to like work hard to like repress them and be like this like husband and father. When he was home, he could just like be freaking dark ass Robert all the time. His next victim is a woman named Morrow. She's described as very beautiful, blonde girl, and she always had this like signature arrow necklace that her boyfriend had bought her. She was very trusting, so when she meets Robert and he asks if he can take her on a ride in his plane, she's game. He brings her to his truck and almost instantly he attacks her. He handcuffs and blindfolds her, and he drives her up to Nick's River. Although she was sweet and timid, she pops off on him. She's screaming at the top of her lungs. She knows it's like the only chance that she has of hopefully somebody hearing her, but they were so far away and so isolated. Like that was what he did. He took you so far that no one would ever hear your screams. And when he got tired of hearing her scream, he hunted her like his other victims. And before burying her, he takes her signature arrow necklace. The following month, a 23-year-old dancer named Andrea leaves her house. She tells her roommate she's really excited because she's got a date with a customer that she had met at the club. He was a wealthy guy. He wanted to take her out for dinner and take her to the mall, so she agrees to meet him at the Boniface Mall, and this is a public place, so she's feeling, you know, even more trusting and like, okay, well, he's not going to do anything in public. Not too many details are known about like what happened when they went to the mall, but obviously she meets with Robert. That's the man that she was referring to, and at some point he makes her feel comfortable enough to leave the mall and get in his truck. From there, the same thing happened to her as the other women. She's blindfolded, handcuffed, and driven up to Nick River. She's also assaulted, but she's remaining calm, thinking that it's her best opportunity to hopefully survive. And at one point, she asks if she can leave the car to go to the bathroom. I guess Robert also has to go, so he agrees to let her go, and, you know, being such a gentleman, allows to give her some privacy. So she goes off on one side of the vehicle to go to the bathroom, and he goes on the other side. But as she was getting up, she sees that he's leaving the vehicle and that the gun is still in there. So she walks like, you know, kind of like slowly away and looking behind to see like where he's at. And when she feels like he's far enough away, she makes her move. She books it to the car, but he hears the rustling and he quickly realizes like, oh my gosh, like she's going for the gun. So he rushes to the vehicle too, and they literally both grab the gun at the same time, but Robert overpowers her. At this point though, she knows that she's got nothing to lose. Like she's like, hey, I was doing the nice thing. So she attacks him with everything she's got. She's clawing at him. He reaches for the gun though that's fallen in this like scuffle that they're having, and unfortunately she meets the same fate as the women before her. Before disposing of her body, he also keeps a trophy of hers, and he takes off her pearl earrings and a necklace. Then in May 1982, a woman named Sue Luna was a dancer at the Good Times Lounge, meets Robert. She finds him actually quite sweet and timid. Like he's got this like stutter thing going on, so she's not intimidated by him at all. So when he asks her if he can pay her $300 to take like provocative photos of her, she's game, and they set a date to get the photos done on May 26th, and Sue was never seen again. On the 27th, she actually had plans to hang out with her sister because her sister was getting ready to move the following week to another state. And when her sister shows up to her apartment, Sue's roommate answers the door, and she's like, no, like she never came home last night. At first, her sister thinks like maybe she just forgot about their plans, and she waits another day or so. But by the 30th, when she still hadn't heard from her, she knew something was wrong. She reports her missing, and then she decides that she's not even going to move move at this point, and she just wants to wait until Sue's found. Next couple months go by, and a 19-year-old named Tammy Peterson is the next to go missing. She was scouted by a company called Talents West, which is who also employed Sue. Tammy was scouted and coming from Seattle, and she was like promised the world. She thought it was going to be this like bougie experience, and it was very far from what she was promised. The club that she came to work for was really scuzzy. Her boss was an absolute slimeball who basically had her trapped because if she left, she'd have to pay him like all of this money that he had like poured into getting her there, funding the apartment that she was living in, and her hands were basically tied at this point that she needed to like work harder to make enough money to get out of the agreement. It sounds like she was so stressed out and just feeling really helpless, and her last phone call to her mom, she told her, you know, like, I just got to work like a little bit harder and I'm going to be home soon. Unfortunately, that was the last time that Tammy would ever talk to her mother, and like the other women, saw this dark side in Robert that she never saw coming. The next month, which was September, was moose hunting season, and an off-duty police officer is hunting with one of his buddies in Nick River. And as they're scoping the area, they like come across this like one patch that has like this like raised gravel and ice. So it caught his attention and like rubbed him the wrong way, and he's like, it looks like something's buried here. And you know, like the officer side of him got curious, so he and his friend start digging, and they uncover clothing items, and then they just like smell this undeniable smell. He's off duty though, so he contacts his sergeant, and they come up and they uncover a body, and it turned out to be Sherry Morrow. As some of these bodies were being found, it didn't slow Robert down. If anything, he started to feel like his same routine was just like getting too repetitive. Another 4 dancers had gone missing in 1983, and he was feeling like the novelty of the death was wearing off. Initially, his intention is to try to like stay away from violence, and he's ready for companionship, not from like, you know, like the wife that he has or anything though. So he sends her away on a European vacation with her children, and he posts an ad in the newspaper in the singles ads. His ad read, adventurous male, 42 years old, 5'11", 165 pounds. Looking for a lady proud to be a woman, to share sincere, honest attachment. Must like to dance and enjoy social life. Willing to put on jeans. Join me in finding what's around the next bend, over the next hill. Enjoy flying your own plane. Beachcombing, fishing, camping. Life is much fuller if shared. Yeah, Robert, you have a wife. Send recent photo. He actually drops this ad off at the newspaper the same day his family leaves to Europe. Dude wastes no time. He ran it from the 8th to the 15th of May, and I guess he got about 30 responses. He lined up several dates, and he ends up really liking this woman named Karen O'Leary. She actually worked for the Alaskan State Troopers. They went out dancing a few times. They even celebrated her birthday together. He even brought her back to like his family home to chill and hang out after dinner a couple times, watched a couple movies, made out a little bit. I guess he did try to put the moves on her, but she said that she wasn't ready for that, which he respected. And it was interesting when I was reading that, I thought like, I wonder if she, you know, was like willing to do that. Would that have like changed his opinion of her, because he had already liked someone before, and then when it went to like go to like the more physical side, he didn't like that so much. Eventually they stopped seeing each other though, and it was like very amicable, and she said the only time she ever felt anything like weird around him was when she saw her dog react when he was in the room. I guess like the dog would, you know, like work its like way out of the room and just like stay out of his path, and it was very timid and scared of him. But she herself never felt uncomfortable or unsafe. Robert did the, you know, singles ad dating there for a little bit, and then eventually that too ran its course, and he went back to trolling the streets. He meets a sex worker named Cindy Paulson, and he offers her $200 for her services, and she agrees. She gets in the car, and very quickly, like the other women, things take a severe turn. Instead of taking her back to the woods though, he takes her to his house. He takes her down to his basement, and I can only imagine how eerie that would have been for her, because his basement is covered in like deer and like moose heads from all of his like hunting trips. When they get down there, there's this like long chain that's attached to one of the support beams in the basement, and he handcuffs her to it. He assaults her and he puts her through hell. I won't go into detail, but it was just awful what she went through. This goes on for the evening, and when he's tired, he falls asleep on the couch behind her. So she's really not given like an opportunity to be alone, to try to like rig herself out of this anyway. When he wakes up, he says to her, "I'm gonna take you somewhere. I want to fly you to my cabin." They leave his house and they go to the airport. He's got her handcuffed and he's got like a blanket over top of her eyes, so she can't see where they're going. She can just like only like feel like the rumbling of the car. So she hears him get out of the truck and it sounds like he's like wrestling in the distance, and she's assuming it's like on the plane. So she manages to move her body around enough to like get a peek through the blanket, and she sees that he's quite far enough that she's confident she can get a head start away from him. In her mind, she figured like, I've got nothing to lose. If I get on this plane, there is no way I'm coming back. So she just effing flies like the wind. She hears him screaming behind her and can like hear him like running up behind her. And she knows she's got a huge disadvantage because her hands are like cuffed in front of her. So she can't like, like work up that speed. She's only got like a certain amount of time in her before she's going to gas out, and he's probably going to, overpower her. But then all of a sudden she sees this truck in the distance, and she just like reaches for every ounce of strength that she has and just like flies even faster than she was before. This truck driver sees her, slams on his brakes, and she just like leaps into the truck and she's like, go. She asks him to take her to a motel, and he wants to take her to the police, but she says that she doesn't feel comfortable with the police. Based on her profession, she just wants to go there and call a friend. He respects her wishes and takes her to this motel, but when she's checking in, the hotel clerk was just really concerned about like how like obviously traumatized she was, so they call the police for her. When the officer comes, it's very obvious that she's been through something major, so he tries to build up trust to just reassure her that he's going to take everything she says seriously and do everything that he can in his power to catch the guy that did this. She agrees to help them, and she takes them to the airport that she just ran from, and Robert's plane is still there, so quickly they're able to tie it back to him. By this point, he had already been long gone from the airport. He knew, like if she says something, I've got to go and like try to cover my tracks. So he had gone back to the house, got rid of like the chains that were there, and he called a friend of his and he said that he needed an alibi. His story to his friend though was that he was in an embarrassing situation where he, I gotta admit, I had hired, somebody for money, and she tried to rob me, she tried to attack me, so, it got a little bit messy, and if she tries to go to the police and spin some story, I just need an alibi to say that like I was actually never even with her. The friend believes his story and agrees to lie to him, and after he comes back from meeting with him and arrives home, the police are already there waiting for him. They take him into the station and question him, and he agrees to bring them back to the house and allow them to do a search. They search the home, and although the layout is exactly what Cindy said it looked like, there's no like indication of weapons that were used. The chains are gone. Obviously, he's not going to leave them there. And then when they follow up with his friend, who he said was his alibi, it checks out. And it made Cindy really frustrated because she felt like now this case was turning into her like trying to prove herself. And it made the case just kind of like go stagnant, and it didn't excel from there. In the meantime, more bodies were being found in the Nix area. And a few times, shell casings were also found in these like shallow graves, and they were able to tie them back to being fired from the same gun. So now detectives are leaning more towards this being a serial killer finally. To get the jump on who they should be looking for, they hire a profiler. And in the book that I read, this was actually the profiler that the show Mindhunter on Netflix was based on. And you guys know how much I love profilers. So he says that the guy they're looking for is probably a seasoned hunter. He loved being outdoors, possibly had a gun collection. He believed that he would be married to a religious woman who would have no idea of like her husband's secret life. Like, how do you know this stuff? He also said that he was probably a respected member of the community who may own a business. And Robert had actually opened up his own bakery a few years prior. So while they're looking at files in the police station to like see if they have anybody who could match this description, Robert's name comes up. They dig deeper into him and they find a way that they can get like a legal search warrant to search his house. What happened was he had filed an insurance claim and said that his house was burglarized and that the burglars took his gun collection and they also took like all of his like trophy heads, and it was valued at like over like $100,000. That's actually the money that he used to open his bakery. But when they saw the photos of his residence, when they went to go like follow up on Cindy's account of what had happened, they see that all of that stuff was there. So they're like, bro, that's insurance fraud. So because of that, they're able to get a search warrant, and his poor mother is there visiting. His wife is home now with the kids, and they're all there while the police are just like ripping through the house. They're coming up with nothing, and they're almost ready to go when one of the officers decides to go up into the attic. When they get there, they find that in between some of the insulation, there's jewelry. Among it is Sue's arrow necklace, pearl earrings, and other trophy items from his victims. Also up there is a map that has about like 20 X's marked on it. When they follow up with some of the remains that had already been found in the Nix area, sure enough, they were exactly located where some of these X's were. He's finally arrested, and when they show him the map, there's pretty much no denying it. So he admits that he's responsible, and he even agrees to go up with the police to the area and help locate some of the bodies that hadn't been found. I mean, he's still a freaking piece of absolute trash, but there is also always a part of me that has appreciation when somebody can do that, only for the victims' family members who don't ever get that closure when they can't bring their loved ones home. On that trip, the police were able to bring over 12 missing women home. Robert pled guilty and he was sentenced to 461 years in jail plus life in prison, just that added good measure. The exact number of his victims is not even known. Even he said he couldn't remember certain names of some of these women, so unfortunately there are families out there who will never know if he was responsible for their loved ones being missing. It's estimated he killed anywhere from between 20 to 30 women. This one, though, it just frustrated me so much and it broke my heart because there were so many similarities, like I said, to the Robert Pickton case, and how when it comes to, somebody who's more respected in society versus someone who is in the sex industry or somebody who's known to struggle with addiction, their voice, holds more weight. And it's absolute bullshit. So many women's lives could have been saved had some of these survivors been taken seriously, and he was kept behind bars because their stories were validated. He died in jail from natural causes, which was just too friggin' easy and nice for him. He died on August 21st, 2014, and he was 75 years old. Ugh, this guy is just like right up there with like just the worst. That was a really heavy one, you guys. A lot to go through. A lot of frustration, but it's another reminder that like there's just so much work to do and we just need to start like validating everybody's voice. That is it for me today, you guys. Thank you so much for coming by and watching. If you haven't already, please don't forget to like and subscribe. I love and I appreciate you so much. It means the absolute world to me. I will see you in the next video and I will miss you terribly. Until then, make sure to love each other, love yourself, and I will see you soon.